When you drive your car, do you take account of the congestion that it causes? When your neighbor fails to get a flu vaccination, do you wonder, hey, your decision is affecting me because it's putting me at risk? Economists address these types of questions by considering externalities. I'm Professor John List, and this is Economics for Everyone. Welcome to the world of Chicago economics. Today, we are going to talk about externalities. Remember that economics is the study of people's choices and how those choices affect others. Today, we're going to focus on the last part of that definition, externalities. How does your choice affect others? I was once in a classroom when a teacher walked in. He had a cigar in his hand, and he lit that cigar and blew out a big puff of smoke. He said, "Class, welcome to the world of externalities." I'll never forget that because I suddenly realized that when people smoke, they're not only affecting their own health, but they're bestowing an externality on other people. So far, when we model supply and demand, we think of a demand curve as the individual's willingness to pay. It's their private demand curve. And we think about the seller's private marginal cost curve. For example, when you purchase an Uber trip, you get some consumer surplus from that, and that affects you, but it also affected Uber. Not only are the people involved in the transaction affected, but so are innocent bystanders. These spillovers can be positive or negative. When we take an Uber, we not only pay for the Uber trip, but that car causes pollution. And pollution has negative health consequences. Another kind of externality is congestion. When you add up all of the congestion costs across the world, it ends up being one of the largest externalities that we impose on each other. Those consequences are called negative externalities, and they result from you taking the Uber trip. But when we draw up the Uber market, we just draw a demand for Uber trips, and we draw a supply curve for Uber trips. Those social costs that we impose on others, they're nowhere to be found in there. So we need to make an adjustment for those externalities to make sure that we're making the world a better place and accounting for those negative consequences. Now, I've been focusing on negative externalities, but there are a lot of examples of positive externalities. Think about education. Every extra year of education that you get, you make about 12% more in labor markets. You get better jobs. Those are private benefits. But there are also positive spillovers because the more education that people take on, they then commit less crime. They're unemployed less often. They're more informed voters. They pay higher taxes because they earn more money. They create really cool gadgets because they have a great level of education. Those are positive externalities. Now, the government recommends and sees these things. That's why a lot of public education is subsidized. Now, at the individual level, all of you impose a positive externality when you get a flu vaccination. Now, you might be thinking, well, wait a second. If I get the vaccine for a flu, how does that help others? Now, researchers have studied the externalities of vaccinations, and what they find is that every one flu shot that a person gets, that has as large of an effect of decreasing the number of infections by 1.5. So that means if we have 10 more vaccinations, we have foregone 15 more flu infections. It's not only the private benefits and private costs to you, but there are spillovers. You have protected not only yourself, but also others. That's a pretty large positive externality, and it's something to take into account when making your own decision. Economists focus on a demand and supply framework that tends to ignore these positive and negative externalities. But all it is a simple amendment. We can move from private benefits to private plus social benefits. So if you care about how your decisions affect others, we can amend the supply and demand framework to account for those social benefits and social costs of your actions. The government does this all the time. When the government thinks about, should we regulate a certain industry, part of the consideration is, does that industry impose negative or positive externalities on others? If it does, that's called a market failure, because the traditional way that we think about that market fails to adjust for those types of externalities. So the government goes into those markets with taxes or subsidies or quantity constraints, and they figure out what is the best way to move that market to something that is more efficient and more optimal for us all. That's externalities. That's Chicago economics. That's economics for everyone.